everybody. It is 7 o'clock, according to the clock in the back of the room. Hello. Good evening. We are here for our workshop meeting, Romeo's Financial Outlook. It's not on the agenda, but generally we start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, so I think we should do that. Sorry, clerk. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sorry. Okay, tonight, definitely not our normal type of meeting, a little more informal. I'm going to start the meeting tonight by, if you grabbed a packet back here, we have 3 things back there. You have a PowerPoint that matches what's up here. That is one thing, and accounting, Plant Moran will go over that with us in a little bit. What I'd like to discuss is a few things towards the back of that. There's 2 separate packets. We have pictures. I tried to give us a little bit of visual here. So we have a DPW and a wastewater one. Let's start with DPW. It's a little smaller. I was able to condense some stuff here. So what we're doing here, I'm going to, very simple, Romeo's income, our revenue, Romeo's needs. So somewhere in here, in this disparity, is what we need to figure out. Part of tonight is we are starting budget talks here. Budget needs to be approved by July 1. So we start those budget talks, those basic things. What do we need? What are the assets that are coming due? And in order for us to do that this year, the Headley rollback didn't happen. So we have, this year was an extra $320, $350 for that police contract. Well, guess what? Next year in that budget, it's like $375. It's even more than what it was this year because it goes up incrementally each year. So we are capturing no more money. We have that much more liability. And I want you to see, so some of these pictures with the capital improvement plan with the grant that we got from SEMCOG, they're putting the assets in order. We're going to get that in the spring. They said maybe March. But that's going to be cutting it way too close for us when it comes to talks with budget. So here what I have is pictures, trying to give you a visual. I feel like I've been saying it multiple times at the podium over the last couple years. Our assets are failing, they need to be replaced. It's not for a fact of, I just want a new shiny refrigerator even though the other one works. They're literally breaking, the doors are falling off, the freezer doesn't work anymore. It's time for new stuff. Welcome. Clerk Lucero came in, kind of blew us all away with his interpretation of how the assets were. So somewhere in the middle there, trying to give you a visual so that you can interpret it for yourself, the needs, the importance. So these are just some of the things. So starting off with our DPW, we have just some pictures of one thing, the salt barn. You can see the salt barn is literally rusting apart. The wall, you see the rust line, it's bulging, so now when the salt gets in there and pushes on it, it's gonna bust the walls, it's giving way. That only has so much more time. Some of the other pictures here have to do with their parking lot. If you look at them, it might actually just be easier to churn it up and make it dirt than to live with the way that it is like this. Those are just a couple of the things at the DPW. There are other things that I didn't get to that Tim is supervisor for, the water tower, the iron removal plant. There are things at both of those also. The second one, we have our wastewater treatment plant. In some of these pictures, I have a few things here. The driveway in the building is in the first portion of it. You can see in the collection of pictures, the driveway, how it looks. I know we all walk our parking lots, and when I say it's bad, when it's worse than what we walk in every day. And the delivery trucks come in through here, and it doesn't help. It only gets worse. It's to the point where it's not going to say they're not going to deliver, but they don't like doing it. You see in some of the pictures the building that is being held together by spray foam. How structural is it? How important? I don't know. But either way, we have a building being held together with some spray foam. The next picture, I put a little bit of context to it. So the top left picture that sits alone. Well, I went out there to take these pictures. The guys are out there working on this electrical box of sorts. While they're fixing it, what's going on? What's broken now? Whatever this part is, I couldn't tell you the term of it, but they tell me, well, it broke, it's old, so we called to get a quote, $1,300. We need 2 of them. So he said, so I made some phone calls. I found this part that I needed for $200. Our employees constantly do the best they can with what they have. They don't just spend the tax dollars and go, it's just a job, I'll just do the easiest thing. I want you to know they do their due diligence and they care. Below that, there's a couple pictures. These are the holding tanks. This is kind of where, correct me if I'm wrong, Al, this is where the last part of the water out there in the holding tanks. The second picture on the right, you can kind of see, I was trying to get a good picture of the track there, covered in algae. Those tracks, there's a part that makes the tracks spin. They constantly move. There's 4 holding tanks. They all need parts to make that mechanism move. I can't even guess the cost of that part. I don't remember. Next at wastewater, we have some pictures of the roof. The pictures in the packets aren't as good as our pictures. I was trying to get them as clear as possible for you guys to see the condition of the roof. It is falling apart. It is time for a new roof. There is grass growing on the roof. Another set, gearboxes. Okay, last year we approved this one gearbox. It was $35,000. They were all similarly replaced at the same time. We have 8 of them. We just bought one at $35,000, so we need about another $280,000 just for this one part. Here's the picture of it. You can see it all rusted, and that was the broken one. They cannot be rehabbed. They do not make them anymore. Remember, we bought the one, sent it back. They thought it would work. It didn't, and so then we ended up paying even more money. The next one is the raw and final, is it wear? So what's happening here is the pipe should be solid. Unfortunately, in the second picture, you can see how it's rusted through, so the water continually falls back in that. And like I said, this is in those holding tanks at the end. So what happens there is when it falls back in there, guess where it goes? Back to the front of the plant and back through the plant. So we treat that water all over again because we have a lever that's rusted and it's taking in water. And there's multiple of those also. What do they say? They're $9,000 each. They have 8 of them. That's another about $72,000. And all of these numbers are without installation. Delivery, I don't know. The second one is the variable frequency drive. When this was explained to me, I kind of just, my jaw dropped and went, buy them. So what this does, it's the variable frequency, turns on and off depending on the flow that's coming through the plant. Should this break as they are getting close to end of life, what will happen? Overflow. Overflow means discharge, means, does anyone know what's going on in Washington Township right now? We don't want that. And we need 2 of them. Again, this one isn't as much. These ones are only $5,000 a piece. We need 2. We need to buy them. These are just some of the things that scratched the surface when I said, hey, what are some things that we can actually show that we can see and understand? And these are the pictures on the surface that they said, okay, here you go. And trying to get it across, our revenue and our needs, they're not close. So we either, somewhere in the middle here is either reduction of services, which I don't think our people want, or it's some sort of raising millage, special assessment, which ultimately, in plain language, is your taxes go up. So we have some choices to make. At this point, that is all I have. If Plant Moran, take over with your presentation here.
That's a great introduction. The room's very
Doom and
excited.
gloom, fabulous.
No, thank you for those pictures. So, yeah, as an outsider, I don't live here. I don't drive the streets. I don't work at the water plant. So when we're talking about things have to be replaced, conceptually I get it. But when you see in color pictures that there are holes in pipes and water is leaking out, or there's a roof that water pools on it and then it flows into the building presumably, it really explains a lot that looking just at numbers doesn't. So thank you for that. I have a much greater understanding of what the issues are. I'm sorry, I should introduce myself. My name is Brian Kamler. I'm a partner with Plant Moran. I lead our governmental practice, all services related to local units of government. With me is my partner, Carrie Shea, and our manager, Danielle Kelly. Danielle does all the work, most of the work for the Village of Romeo, and Carrie and I just come and take credit for it. But really, it's Danielle. The reason that we're here tonight is to talk about the overall financial picture of Romeo. So you've seen the pictures of the things that need to be replaced or fixed or improved or rebuilt, and that cost money. And it's not necessarily money that you just have laying around. Most communities your size, they don't have $20 million laying around. They have to have a way to raise that money. And in government, not all money can be spent equally. There are different streams of revenue that come in. Those streams of revenue can only go towards certain things. And so in this presentation, I will start with some of the overall conceptual accounting, and then we're going to move into the actual numbers for the Village of Romeo. So if you were to do some of these projects without an additional revenue source, what does that look like? And I'll give you a preview. It doesn't look good. It's nothing that I would recommend you doing. The recommendation is find a revenue source, regardless, whatever that has to be. But you'll need a revenue source to fix the things that need fixing. But let's start at the beginning. So governmental accounting, it's different than a business, and it's certainly different than our home budgets. So our home budget, we have our wages, we pay our mortgage, we pay for food, we pay our car payment, but regardless of where our money comes in, we might have interest coming in, got another side gig that's bringing money in, you can make a decision to spend that money however you like. If you want to buy a nicer car, buy better food, go out to eat, whatever you want, it's your decision, and all the money spends equally. Government doesn't really work like that. So we have these things called funds. You're familiar with the general fund, you're familiar with the special revenue funds. Why do we do this? We do this because as a municipality, you wear a lot of hats, you provide a lot of different services, and there are either strings attached or legal restrictions on how you spend that money coming in. And so think of it as a series of shoeboxes. Taking cash goes into one shoebox, we set that aside. That's only for roads. We get more money here from water and sewer, we put that in this shoebox. That can only go toward water and sewer. If we spent it on police, we would get sued. It is that simple. So we have all these different shoeboxes or funds. We put the money in the individual funds and then only spend that money on what the fund is allowed to spend money on. whether that's a law, whether it's a grant restriction, local ordinance, what have you. The reason why we do this differently is than what we do with business or what we do with our own home budget is that we're trying to answer two different questions. The first question that government accounting answers is, what did you do, municipality, with the money we gave you? And so if we threw everything into one pot, it would be very difficult to unwind that, to know that your taxes went to something, your water and sewer money went to something else. By putting it into these funds, we can answer that question more easily. Clearly, this stream of revenue only went toward these particular purposes. The second question that is attempts to be answered by governmental accounting is, are the current taxpayers or customers, if we're talking water and sewer, are they paying the full cost of the services that they receive? Now, that full cost is not just cash going out the door. That full cost, when we look at the village as a whole, includes things like depreciation on our streets and infrastructures. If the residents and taxpayers and business owners are paying the full freight of the services that they receive for living here or operating here, if it were the case, either those things would already have been fixed because you had the money to do so, or you would be sitting on a giant pile of money waiting to fix these things. And the answer is no, we have not. Anyone that has lived here has not paid the full cost. They've paid their taxes, they've paid their water bill, they've paid what's been asked of them, no question. But the fact that all of these things have to be replaced and there isn't money available to do so means that collectively the village has not been paying for the full cost of service. General fund is the fund that we spend the most time talking about. It's the one that you spend the most time talking about for budgeting. It's the one that pretty much everybody cares about. And it is the catch-all fund. So if there is an expense without a separate segregated revenue source, it's going to come out of general fund. If we have a oops, something broke, and we don't have a reserve somewhere else, it's going to come out of general fund. So absent a water and sewer stream of revenue, if a catastrophe happens at one of your plants, and if water and sewer doesn't have the ability to pay for it, it's going to come out of general fund. If your street funds don't have adequate funding from Act 51 and the Michigan Department of Transportation, if they don't have enough money in those funds to pay for this street that is turning to gravel, it would come out of general fund. But obviously, general fund has a limit. There's only so much money in the general fund. It can't pay, it can't be the catch-all every time we have a problem, every time we have a construction project, every time we have to come up with a big chunk of change. General fund covers operations. When it's a big ticket item though, it's usually not general fund that has the ability to pay for it. So I've mentioned some of the other funds that you have, the road funds, the water and sewer funds, you have a cemetery. So all of these things are individual shoeboxes. They have their own revenue sources, and we spend the money out of those shoeboxes to pay for that activity. Whatever money is left in the shoebox after we pay the costs, we can use that for future projects within the confines of those individual funds. So I mentioned you'll get sued if you take water and sewer money and pay for police with it. That is it's case precedent that was set 25 years ago, a lawsuit called Bolt versus the City of Lansing. So if you spend water and sewer money where you're not supposed to, there are watchdogs that will notice that, they will know it, and then they will create or assemble a class action lawsuit. I can name you 40 communities in Michigan that have fought that over the last 10 years. So water and sewer money, well, if we raise rates here, we can pay for this construction over here. No, water and sewer, he's going to pay for water and sewer. So special revenue funds, we've mentioned these. Major and local streets are predominantly funded by Michigan Department of Transportation. When you fill up your gas tank, You are paying a gas and weight tax at the pump. That tax is accumulated in Lansing and redistributed to all the cities and villages in the state. Is it enough money to fix the damn roads like Governor Whitmer said? No, it is not. Not even close. Is it enough to maintain? Questionable. Some years it is, some years it's not. Certainly can get the street clean, can fix potholes usually, but when it comes to replacing a mile-long stretch of road, maybe you can do one of those a year, maybe you can do one every 3 years. How many miles of major local streets do you have here in the village? I don't know the answer, it's kind of rhetorical, but you don't have enough money coming in from MDOT in order to take care of these things. And so an additional revenue stream is necessary when these roads start breaking down into gravel. I know that you have a big plan for the downtown and fixing the areas in the various quadrants. Those are big ticket items, and they just get more and more expensive every year. Cost of concrete went up 30% a couple of years ago. It certainly hasn't come back down, and it's just gonna get more and more expensive. So if you think, well, if we just do a little bit every year, we'll be fine. We'll get there over the next 10 or 15 years. You won't, because your revenue will not grow as fast as the expenses grow, and you'll always be playing catch up, and you'll never make up enough ground. So we talked about water and sewer. Water and sewer has to stand on its own. General fund shouldn't support water and sewer because general fund is limited. You've got property taxes, you can only raise so much. You can only generate so much revenue from your property taxes. State shared revenue is capped by the state. You get what you get. You can't do anything to make them give you more. Water and sewer, you have the ability to charge your customers as much as necessary in order to maintain the system and provide service. So in that regard, water and sewer should always be the fund that's in the best shape because you have the ability to raise exactly what you need to take care of everything. Unfortunately, most water and sewer funds across the state of Michigan are not the best funded fund or best financed fund within the municipality because it's hard politically and publicly to raise water and sewer rates. But the ability is there. So when I see pictures of plants that are falling apart, pipes that have holes in it, and water and sewer, if it doesn't have the ability to pay for those, my first thought is you should have been raising your rates more, but that's water under the bridge. That's too late now. Now we have to go from this moment forward, how much are we gonna have to raise rates in order to generate enough money to fix all those things? And it should only come from water and sewer. All right, so with that, we're gonna talk about fund balance. I know you all know the term, but we're gonna talk a little bit more about what it is. I believe, Danielle, you're gonna cover those. All right, come on up, kid.
Hello, it's nice to see everybody again. So fund balance, Brian kind of talked about this, but we'll go into it a little bit more in depth. So what is fund balance? So fund balance is a way to think of almost like a little pot of money sitting in the fund waiting to be spent if you have the extra ability. So it's the assets, so the things we own, our cash, our receivables, any deferred outflows and liabilities, what we owe to other people, and any deferred inflows, which is receivables we have out there but we didn't collect on time. That equals your fund balance. So it's very important that you have enough fund balance to maintain a minimum level to finance operations. And additional fund balance is required if you have long-term asset plans or obligations that you need to fund. So fund balance is usually a positive term. Fund deficit means that we ran out of money. And the state of Michigan requires deficit elimination plans if that happens. So is fund balance just there for you to spend? It depends. So fund balance is also cut up into several different categories. So you have your non-spendable, meaning that I know that I have this obligation out there, like insurance, let's say. So that portion of my fund balance at the end of the year from the audit presentation you had on Monday, there was about $200,000 of that in general fund that it's actually not available. It's a prepaid. You have restricted fund balance, which is like your major and local street funds. That fund balance can only be used on roads. You have a committed fund balance, which is an act of this body that says, as an example, we want to commit X amount of dollars to buy police cars next year. So we're going to commit part of our fund balance, and that can only be undone by another board action. You have assigned fund balance, which can be done internally. It's less formal, but it's the same idea as a committed fund balance. And then you have unassigned, which is what is actually available as a free-for-all. What do you want to spend this money on? You as the governing body, you always have the authority to recommit or reassign fund balance. That is part of your power. So the question is, how much fund balance should we have? So it's not a simple question. Zero's not an option, because then you have no savings to fall back on if something happens in your operations. There's an appropriate range, but it's also, you can have too little, but you can also have too much. And having too much can have a political conception of you're just hoarding our tax money and not spending it the way you should be. So the right amount depends on several different factors. So what are the fund balance factors? What's your risk tolerance as a community? What big projects do you know you have out there? And are taxes going to be any different the next fiscal year? So last year, this body did adopt a fund balance policy, which has 2 tiers related to general fund. So you have 25% of your operating expenditures, so we take any capital out of that. Just to finance operations, we save. We then save up to 50 to 100% of operating expenditures, usually about 50, for any emergencies. So something happens, we have that pot of money and unassigned available to us to fix whatever the problem is. We have the caveat in the policy that if that tier 2, so 50%, drops below 50%, we will adjust the budget within the next year or two to bring it back up to that 50%. So we have our own safeguards that we've talked about and we've put in place. So getting into revenue. So we're just going to look at the general fund because, as we talked about before, it's kind of the biggest fund and the one we want to focus on. So this is a high-level pie chart of where your revenue comes in from general fund. About 51% of that is property tax revenue. 22% is money from personal property tax reimbursement from the LCSA. And then about 12% is what we get from the state of Michigan from sales tax. The rest is a little bit lower. Your interest revenue has gone up due to efforts in investing by the treasurer. So then going into expenditures, public safety is 58% of your expenditures. And what I want you to notice is that, and this includes police, fire with Bruce Township, as well as dispatch. Property tax is about $2.2 million in revenue. Public safety is about $2.2 million in revenue. So your entire general fund millage is spent by public safety, meaning that there's not a lot left over for the other services that the general fund provides. So the next biggest piece of the pie is general government. That is this board, the clerk, the treasurer, everyone that works in Village Hall, tree board, historical district commission. That's all the rest of the general government. We then have public works and the transfers out, which this year it's a little bit higher because we have to support the municipal street fund for the overage in the street project in order to keep that fund out of a deficit, so we don't have to file a deficit elimination plan with the state. The remaining of that is to pay for retiree health care. So some upcoming significant expenditures that were identified by administration were the street improvement project. We've run out of bond money. The estimate for that project was way too low. And so we were only able to finish the east side and some of the northwest, but there are still projects that need to be fixed in the northwest quadrant, and we haven't done anything on the southwest quadrant yet. So the new estimates from the engineer are about $430,000 to finish the northwest quadrant, about $5.6 million to finish the southwest quadrant, and then about $2 million for parking lot reconstruction, and that's just an estimate that we have right now. Another significant estimate that's coming up is the Bruce Township fire contract. The current contract we're under now has a 6% increase year over year. If we extrapolate that out, that comes to almost $1 million we're paying in fire to Bruce Township as by 2030. For context, in fiscal year '24, you paid $550,000, so it's doubled. We also have police capital needs that have been identified by the chief that you see listed here over the next 4 years. So then I'll turn it over to Carrie to go over the forecast.
Thanks, Danielle. One thing I want to mention on the deficit elimination plan, just to keep in mind as far as the general fund, so you are not allowed by state law to budget a deficit in communities where it's happened, just because some of this forecast will show a deficit in the general fund. So I just want to preface what that means. Not that this body's going to hopefully allow that to happen, but if that were to happen, in addition to doing a deficit elimination plan, the state does not come out and take over the government by any means, but you do have to do monthly reporting to the state every month, cash flows, budget to actuals, and everything. So it's not an ideal position to be in at all, and the state does take that very seriously. So for purposes of forecast, I want that to be top of mind that these are forecasted numbers. The blue bars on this is your revenue, so these would be actuals through '24, budgets for '25, and then reasonable projections using mostly inflation or a few other things from management at this point. And then the red is your operating expenditures. Those yellow bars are the estimated needs for capital at this point. Danielle highlighted some of those on the previous slide. We'll talk about it a little later, but there is an active capital improvement plan in motion that is not going to be completed until spring. So we don't have that information. Administration's done their best job of reaching out to department heads and chief and things like that to know what some of these estimates are, and obviously we know on some of the road funding what that might look like. But this is just a very preliminary where we are. Once that comes in, I don't expect that the capital outlay will go down. I expect it to be a higher number, but I think it's April, correct me if I'm wrong. March, April, that we expect to have that data. So this can all be updated at that time. So for purposes of just putting in the cost, you will see that there's very high bars in 26 and 27. That year 2026 is the $5.7 million in street improvements that we mentioned to complete the quadrants, and then in 27 is the parking lot construction. I recognize your first thing maybe, well, Carrie, we're not going to go and spend the money we don't have necessarily in those years, and yes, the plan may have to look differently, but for purposes of just showing what the immediate needs are, we just hit it in those years to show the projection. So if you take that information, see, we can be artists too as accountants. So the red plus the yellow bars are both expenditures, the outlay and the expenses. Those are now the orange bar on this slide. So you can see that in the last few years, 23, 24, you're adding a little bit every year. And again, this is just general fund to your fund balance. We get close in 25. 26 and 27 are obviously escalated because we have those significant projects in there, and then you go back to kind of your status quo. So what does this mean about your fund balance health? So Danielle prefaced that that's the accumulation of your revenues and expenditures over time, and you can see that if you were to maintain in line with your reserve policy, that would be the blue bars on here. That's where you should be at. So you can tell that over the past couple years, and the projection for 25 is the green is where that ending is. So you're in a healthy spot over where your policy is, which is perfectly fine to be in that. It's just a minimum policy. But you can tell when those capital outlays start to come into play, you are now going into where your ending fund balance is in that deficit position that we spoke of, that you, by state law, cannot enter into. So this chart was us being accountants and saying, all right, let's look at these forecasted numbers that we've estimated and say, what would we need to possibly do as far as a revenue source to to stabilize that deficit from happening. And again, fully recognize those expenditures might happen over 3 or 4 years, but part of what administration also talked about is, as a community, most communities don't want to be in a state of construction for 5, 7 years on all of your roads. So a lot of them look for a way that you can do it in a more acute period of time, whether that's a bond or a millage or whatever, so that you're also not in constant construction. So what we did here is said, okay, let's leave those expenditures, in those couple years, however they fall out, but we want to make sure, one, we don't go into a deficit, and then ideally, how we want to stay in line with our fund balance policy. So you'll see the yellow line, we said, okay, let's play with the numbers. So when we got to 1.5 million over these few years and kind of into perpetuity, that ending fund balance line, the row right below the yellow line, you can see that your total fund balance at least stays positive. The line at the bottom where you see the red, this is showing your over under to your reserve. So you go out of compliance with your policy, which can happen from year to year, but this will also kind of stabilize you. So for perspective, to get about 1.5 million in revenue for the village is about 6.8 mils. Doesn't mean that has to be the number, doesn't mean that has to be the mils. It's just a projection of what some of these different scenarios could look like. So on this slide, we have the same blue bars. Here's the fund balance reserve, requirement with the policy. Green is where ending fund balance falls, and red is that additional revenue source. So when you include that additional revenue source, you can see the change that, unlike here where those green bars are sending you into a deficit, we're maintaining a positive fund balance over those years. Very small. So I mentioned additional expenditures that are not in this forecast. So one of them is the SEMCOG capital improvement plan that will come in spring and likely have more needs. Collective bargaining agreements, so the following agreements are up for negotiation in fiscal 26, and so normally those don't lead to lower cost. Also, there's a lot of conversation with Bruce Township right now, so if there is a possible new police building, that would also be a cost that's not included. So we didn't want to just leave you hanging with that. There are some options that you have, which is a positive. There are some communities that we have worked with that don't have a revenue option. They may be maxed out on their millage base. They may, that's a really, really tough spot. There are things that you can consider as you work through this in the next few months and determine the priorities of the village. So a public safety special assessment is an option that is out there under Public Act 33 for you. You can generate up to 28 mils. So the scenario we had was 6.8 just to get to that 1.5. That is the millage for that each year would be at the discretion of the board. You could bond, like you've done in the past for the additional road and parking. That would get you the proceeds to do some of the repairs in an acute period of time. You still very likely would need some sort of revenue source from a millage because that debt service is going to, as you look back to this slide, you can see even the last few years that revenue and expense is really close. Like you're adding a little or very close in years. So if you were to bond, you get the proceeds, you do the project, but you have to obviously pay that debt service. You would need some additional millage to cover.
And if I could add a little bit to that, going
Sure.
back to what Brian spoke about earlier, that bond for the road improvement has to stay in that shoebox of road improvement. So that does not help us to fixing our asset, all the building and all the other assets. So yes, we could bond for the roads, but just like we did, we had to spend it on the roads. The buildings are still falling apart. Wages still have to be negotiated. That is an option, but it's a part of the puzzle I like that option for what it is in that it can only be spent on that. It's only for that short period of time. Right now our bond is 15 years. After that 15 years, we're done paying that. It's not a mill that's in perpetuity that the board then says, how much do we need to go up to this year? It's for the roads, it's paid for, in 15 years, we know we've paid it and it's done. However, just that option alone won't take care of all of the problems.
The other option that's out there as it relates to revenue is to do the Headley override, which is what went before voters before. That would generate about $500,000 a year, which again would be limited to some degree, right? It will significantly help, and it would depend how you would potentially structure different payments, but that is another option. So our goal today isn't to sit here and say, here's the plan we see. It's more to just express what the capital needs and how that aligns with the current finances, and give a couple options that as you work through this as a board and you work through your budget, of things that you can do to help to align those pieces to make a plan. So it is in the best interest of the village that you maintain a positive fund balance. So that needs to be at the forefront of any future forecast projections that are done, that you maintain compliance with your fund balance policy. Again, 1 year out with a plan to get out back in balance is okay, but that is still your guide as to where you need to stay. Considering how long you want construction to take will help you in determining how you finance that, and what kind of payment terms you want that to look like. So those were the slides we had. I know that's a lot of information.
If we could, Police Chief wanted to go a little bit more in depth. At our meeting on Monday, we were talking about some of the police expenses and wages, and he had a little bit more detailed information that I wanted to touch on in that respect.
Absolutely.
Just plugged in.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Well, wow. Based on what we just heard, this might be an unpopular conversation, but it's one that has to be had. We just saw a lot of pictures of some crumbling capital in the village. Clearly needs to be replaced, and got to find the funding for that. I get it. But unfortunately, what gets lost in the sauce sometimes are the people behind that. When we get those parts to replace, who's gonna replace it? People, employees. These are people in this community that make the world go round for this community, make your lives the way they are, and they're people with families. And that kind of parlays into my discussion. On Monday night, I began by introducing this conversation with you, and told you I'd expound on it tonight. Let me, switch to this.
I didn't know we were having a competition of who did a bigger packet.
So the packet in front of you is the concrete figures that I promised you on Monday night. What these concrete figures will show you is just how far behind the officers from the Romeo Police Department, and especially the dispatchers, are relative to their colleagues in southeast Michigan. There are more contracts arriving in my email every day that aren't included in that packet, but I got to tell you, the numbers aren't improving. The numbers reflect specifically that the Romeo Police Department officers are almost $14,000 below industry standards. And worse yet, our dispatchers are nearly $19,000 below industry standards. Every employee of the Romeo Police Department, save one, and I'll get to that one in just a minute, every one of them has a second job. And they're not, they don't have that second job because they're hustling and trying to put a little extra cash in their pocket. Every one of them has that second job because they need to make ends meet. So the dispatch starting wage is right on the federal poverty line for a family of four. their top pay still has that federal poverty line in sight. And I'll get back to that employee that doesn't have the second job. So we have a dispatcher, and I'll give him permission to tell this story, and I'll keep the name out of it to protect the innocent as best I can. But this dispatcher is at top pay with that, as I stated, that federal poverty line in sight. A number of years back, their spouse fell ill and can't work anymore. So now this dispatcher and that top salary is the lone income for the family, spouse and kids. On top of that, because of the medical condition and the $5,000 deductible in the insurance plan before insurance kicks in, they cap out that $5,000 every year. So take that income and subtract it by $5,000, and that's what they're making it on to this very day. Because of that, and as a consequence of that, they receive notification from their school that their kids will qualify for federal free lunch. Now, they had to sit down and have a serious discussion as a couple, because for their kids to receive free lunch, that means their kids' name have to go on a list. And that list goes to the staff in the cafeteria. And that staff is largely volunteer parents whose kids go to that school. And it's happened in the past that names on that list were leaked, and kids suffered bullying. So they decided, we're not going to put our kids through that. We're going to cinch our belts just a little bit more and make sure we can put food in our kids' lunchbox. Now, that's shameful, folks. I would hope there would be more community here tonight. Hopefully there's some watching on TV. But this is an employee of Romeo, a son of Romeo, and really? But let me say this at the same time. These men and women that I talk about, they're committed to this community. They've worked here for years, some of them decades, and they're not looking to break the Romeo Bank. They're just looking, like many of the other employees in other agencies in this community, to not be taken advantage of financially or emotionally any longer. And when I say emotionally, I mean this. There's a dark history here between former village governments and its employees. They've been told things like, be careful what you wish for. Just feel lucky you have a job. And here's a good one. Don't become too expensive, as if to suggest if they speak up, the village is just going to go and try to outsource their job, and they're going to be without a job altogether. A person can only hear this kind of stuff so much before they start to believe it and even start to resent it. Now, I understand that comparables are a thing. You're oftentimes put in a box with your agency size and your community size when we're talking about negotiating for contracts. I get it, and there might be nothing I can do about that tonight. But I got to tell you, I have never, in all my years in this profession, really understood it. My staff does the same job that a much larger community to the south of Macomb County Sheriff's Office, much larger community to the north, the Michigan State Police, the same job that they do. In fact, every day they work hand in hand together. There's no wall built around this community. There's no electric fence. Bad stuff happens here too. I'll give you an example. Within the last few months, we had a domestic violence incident. One of my officers responded to. They were alone. Walked into the house and discovered a female victim beaten to a bloody pulp on the floor. He got on that, had to contend with that, calming her down, getting medical attention on the way, while trying to cover his back and deal with the assailant and the assailant's father, who were still in the house. This went on for several minutes before his backup got there from Washington Township. And I tell you that story to say this. A little not so fun fact is that there are several hundred officers killed in the line of duty every single year in this country. The lion's share of those officers killed in the line of duty are killed in communities just like this one. And they're killed, harken back to that story, because they're by themselves and they're vulnerable. In fact, some people in this community, some people in this room, this board, may not know or may not remember, we here in Romeo had an officer murdered in the line of duty in 1969, right here in Little Romeo. While saying all this, I don't mean to minimize the efforts of employees from all other departments. We have DPW here, water, sewer, some of our great clerical staff. I'm not trying to minimize their efforts at all. They've been taken advantage of also. I'm talking about the police department because that's my job, that's what I know. And I understand, as though I'm still kind of new guy, from listening to stories from a lot of these employees, this has been a systemic problem going on for decades. And I hope tonight that this pulls the curtain back on some of that, that dirty Romeo secret. That packet, please study it, take it home, read it this week. Due to constant employee concerns about Romeo exploiting services elsewhere, they become too expensive. I included something else in that packet that you need to take a look at. It's a comprehensive study done by a retired chief of the Hazel Park Police Department. He's watching tonight, thank you. He's been a great resource for me and continues to be. It's a compelling study, and it does a great job proving that consolidation, going out and outsourcing services, actually turns out to be more expensive with a drastic reduction in services to the community. So if there's any thoughts of that or consideration for that, read that study. I think you'll change your mind. In fact, you're watching this happen right now in live time in Oakland County. There are several communities in Oakland County, look it up, you can find it online or in the paper, that are not happy with the services they're receiving from agencies that they've contracted with. It's very public right now. That's all I've got to say. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them, or after you read that packet, I'm around all week, give me a call.
Thank you, Chief.
Two quick questions, Chief. You mentioned poverty level. What income are you using when you're defining poverty level?
Well, according to the census, the federal poverty level for a family of four was $31,000. That's
Okay.
what their starting wage is as dispatchers.
Okay. And how many officers do we have in relation to number of residents, like ratio-wise?
I don't have the answer to that question, unfortunately.
Well-
I can get that answer for you this week, though, ma'am.
Okay, and that would lead me to my next question. The communities that you chose to present the comparables for, I'd be curious to know how many officers they have per resident as well.
Some of them are equal to us, smaller agencies. Some of them are larger, no question about it. And that's why I addressed the fact that I don't understand that and never have. Smaller agencies do the same job those larger agencies do. They're just at more risk. That's the reality of the matter. And the stats prove that. More officers are killed in communities just like this every year than large cities and larger communities. Because of those reasons I gave you. They're by themselves and vulnerable. And they do the same job. We work daily with MSP in Macomb County, south of us, hand in hand. But those agencies are bigger and they make a lot more money. And again, stressing again, I get it. There are comparables.
Stretching my
They're
brain.
not necessarily looking for that. We're not looking to break the Romeo Bank, just a little bit of equity.
Thank you.
So I'll because I have some of these numbers. We have right around 3,800 residents in the village. We have 8 officers, 9 if you count chief. If we just go off of 8, that's 475 residents to 1 officer. If you go with chief in that, that's 422 to 1. We have anywhere between 10 and 12 miles of road. And oftentimes, and that police force, that size of police force accounts for 1 person on for 24 hours. So 1 person at any given moment in the day is responsible for 12 miles of road. And when we're talking about how many people to each officer, we're just averaging that. But in reality, it's 1 to 3,800. And to talk, when I found out about the officers and what they were paid, and that a lot of them have second jobs or in some cases third jobs, and it was appalling. You should not work here in a profession that you are more likely to get hurt than any other profession out there, and then have to go home and worry about if you can keep your lights on or feed your family. And again, this goes back to Monday. This is not a singular issue in one department. We need to pay our people fairly. I have heard multiple times from this board over the years, not necessarily this body here, but that employees are too much. They make too much. I've heard that they're lazy. They don't do their job. We have to stop doing that. If not for them, I gave a very stark report in September that apparently caught everybody's hair on fire, but no one listened to. This is what I'm talking about, what Brian and them had identified in a nicer manner. We're not, 1.5 doesn't fix anything. We're still crumbling. We need to figure this out. We need to take care of our people. They do their job above and beyond with limited resources and trying to figure out how to do their job, and they shouldn't. We should support them and give them everything they need. And I know I'm going off on a diatribe, but it needs to be said. And the employees need to know that this body has them in mind, because for years, like the chief has said, they've been told they don't, and they just need to be quiet and be thankful. And that cannot be allowed to exist.
Let me go off a little bit sideways from you. I was reminded the other day of our water tower story, of which, if you're newer here, you weren't on the board here, we don't have Matt here tonight, Matt would remember, Zach would remember, how we got our water tower. If you recall, Nate, you might remember, Ford overpaid their taxes, right? And when their accountants remembered or figured it out, they came back to the village and said, hey, what was it, $1 million, $1.5 million? I don't recall. It was in the million. It said, hey, you owe us that money back. So we go, oh, how are we going to do that? So do you know what we did? We looked at our employees who take care of this village, and we said, guys, we got to pay this back. We don't have what it takes. This is our ask. For the next however many years, I think it was about 10 years, we said, if the village continues, you obviously have your job. If we have to pay this in full, everyone loses, right? So we said, hey, will you agree to not have raises? I don't know if we did COLA at least, but will you work with us, not take raises, so when we pay it back, and when we pay it back, and when we get to the end of it, we'll take care of you. Do you know what we did? We paid off our debt on the backs of the people that work for us, and at the end of it, do you know what we did for them? Nothing. We did not catch them up. We've done a little bit a few years ago with past president, wage study, there were some increases, but that doesn't make up for those 10 years. It didn't leap them into an appropriate place. And they take care of us and helped us pay back our debts. It's everywhere. This wasn't supposed to be a fun, happy meeting. This is literally what I've been calling the come to Jesus. Pull back the curtain. Everybody needs to see where we're at. It's not there. And I can sit here as your village president, and I could manage the village right into the ground for you. If you don't want any increases, your infrastructure will continue to crumble, your staff will continue to be unhappy, they will leave, and guess what? Nobody's coming to fill that spot because we don't even offer wages that we can get people in. And I'm gonna give it 10 years, 15 would be insanely generous, that if we continue to act in the way we act, we will be gone. I can't sit here and take my salary and do my work knowing that I'm just literally ineffective in managing the village into the ground. That is pointless. So I come here tonight not with a great story, but just with reality, because I feel like a lot of times we all come in here or we have budget talks, and there's the big elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. Past times, I've only been here 8 years, and in the 8 years with other presidents, never really had quite this conversation reality check. Some of these things that we see as needs, you're not going to like it, but that's actually a want to redo the parking lots at this point. That's a luxury. The needs are the wastewater treatment plant, because when your toilet doesn't flush, that actually affects your life. Granted, maybe twisting and breaking an ankle in the parking lot affects your life too, but not in the same way. Oh, this is discussion, given everyone all the information, let's have some discourse. What are the questions? I see you guys writing. What do we want to talk about?
Thanks, Chief.
Is it just kind of like a too much and let's talk about it a different time?
No,
Okay.
not for me. I hear it. I don't argue it or disagree with it. I tend to like to take a systematic, realistic approach. So I hear all of this, and I know they're all just examples, but for me then, okay, what's the solution? And if I don't have all the facts, I can't make a solution. And when I say facts, like, what's it gonna take to get a new building for the salt? Like, what's it gonna take for this? Like, I need all of that information to lay it out and go, okay, here's what we're dealing with, here's what we need to know. I need to know, has the staff over the past 10 years gotten at least a cost of living raise? I don't know that. I've listened, I've watched, I've been part of it, but to know that detail, no. So I need to know that kind of stuff, but that's because I'm a, see it on paper, figure it out, detail person. So I'm more than happy to move forward and try and figure this out. I just need, for me, more information and different kinds of information to do that.
We can do that. We can work on it.
Yeah.
With our CIP coming due, that will get us, my hope, that will get us more fixed costs and that's going to be a whole list. It's an asset inventory. It's going to give us some criticality. Maybe this is only a $5,000 and this is $30,000, so you assume, well, do the cheap ones, do the lesser first. But that $30,000 one, the criticality and the probability of it breaking or falling apart, you got to do that $30,000
Right.
first, because everything that it trickles down to.
Right.
So we're getting towards there.
Okay.
I don't know,
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. And so I think of things like, not just how do we get more money, but how do we look at what we're spending?
Absolutely, that part of the pie. We might have to reduce services.
Well, not just services, but, I mean, it's not popular to say, but there are expenses and things we probably don't need.
Like what?
Well, I always go back to the K-Cups. At one point, we were spending $80 a month on K-Cups. So little things like that add up.
We don't
Big
drink
thing-
enough K-Cups to make up $1.5 million.
I didn't say there would be.
have-
I know, but I'm just
Not
saying,
ignorant.
that's a
If you
negligible
take
amount.
every small expense, and
Hold
this
on.
is what she's getting at.
We're not going to, you
Well,
have a point, and
th-
please
you
make
add all
your
the
point.
small things
No, I get it. I
adds
get the
up.
stacking
And
nickels to
touch
make
on
dollars. I get it, but
On the raises and the cost of living,
Mm-hmm.
I would argue, how many municipalities, not even businesses, are doing cost of living raises? Because most time you go into a contract with your union, and it's set for years.
The
Might be
union, yes,
3
there's,
years, right? So you
their
have a set-
contract is
You have a
set.
set raise. You have a set raise, and I understand the cost of living, that it's affecting everyone. Everyone across the board, not just our employees, myself included, right? And I understand that, and I'm not arguing, I'm just saying, you had a contract, there was a contract put into place.
We do have
that
some
was set,
outside of it, though,
right? And
is what
cost of
we're
living
referring to.
fluctuates every year, it's not a set, like, this is the cost of living. right? So sometimes it's gonna be below, sometimes it might be above. When the cost of living is 2%, you've negotiated a 3% raise.
But we haven't had a 3% raise in.
I'm just making comparables. I'm not saying what you got, Tim.
We had 2 contracts. We went 4 years where we got 0. The next contract, the guys had the choice of 3%. And they could take it how they wanted it. So it's either 1%, 1%, 1%, or all 3 right up front. And
I'm making a
past contracts,
comparison, Tim. I'm not talking about what you've gotten, what you haven't gotten. I'm just saying it's hard to determine the cost of living in the future, right? How that raise is gonna happen, right? And if it's a negotiated cost,
That we didn't get in the past year, or went with nothing.
I respect that. And all I'm saying, again, is the cost of living is variable, right? And if
Within a
you're already in
tolerance.
contract, and you got a 4% cost of living and a 3% raise, how do you change that contract language, right? You
Okay,
can't go back.
so let's
So
go
moving
forward.
forward-
So I'd like to
Assuming,
finish my
go,
thoughts
yes.
if I can, and just get it out on the table.
Yes,
then.
I see the validity in what you're saying. Every little thing matters. I also see that switching from Starbucks to Big B isn't going to solve the imminent, but it's going to help with that long
It's the
term.
mentality to think that way.
But I'll tell,
If everyone has that mentality, that's where it starts to add up.
and they do, and that's part of why, when I showed you in the one picture, the $1,300 part, they have that mentality. They go, oh, no, that's not acceptable. And they called around
Yeah.
and they found the same comparable for $200. And then also have the knowledge to put it in themselves so that that also didn't cost us. So
Right.
they do work that
I'm
way.
not saying they don't. You
No, I'm
want
just-
feedback, I'm giving you
it's just an
feedback.
example.
Here's thoughts. There's fat somewhere. There has to be. Or if there's not, at least we tighten the belt.
Yeah.
And figure out what can.
Let's find
like
it.
you said,
Planning
parking.
Commission doesn't get paid anymore, $30,000.
Right, fine.
Like, I agree.
I don't want to interrupt the conversation when it's a good time to go this way.
I would like to finish my last couple. So expenses, and you're right, parking lots.
They need to
want
be
versus
done, yeah.
need, I don't know. The ETIV money, that was designated to something, but I sit here month after month and watch and listen to all this money and think, well, yeah, this comes from that. Well, that's okay, because that came from that. Well, that's gonna come from that. Well, that's okay. But in my mind, I'm like, these are all little things that set off the mentality to me of what's okay and what's not okay. I get it, a desk broke, you needed a new desk. $800 is kind of a lot, especially when you buy more than one. I have a hard time with that. I voted no on the scanner because I know that these things are looming, and I know things have to get done, but for all of us to come together to a meeting that this important, I can't approve stuff like that. Like, I just, I
So-
get concerned, and I think we have to operate a little bit differently for now. We have to really not do some of those things, I think.
Which is
And-
fine. I think just to the point is, I am not going to suggest in any sort of way that we do that off the backs of our employees.
Right, I agree.
And that's kind of in the vein of, okay, so $800 on a desk.
I'm
A
not
desk
going to
that,
discuss that with you.
No,
We
that's
had our
fine.
meeting,
But
We voted.
yeah, no, that's fine, but I can at least address it, and if you don't want to have discourse over it, that's fine, but I'm still going to improve my point, is that it comes with a warranty. We have used furniture everywhere, and every time it breaks, we spend more than an $800 desk every time we are just buying used repeatedly. And cost of living, and I'm sure Brian, because Brian stood up, he's probably going to talk about that, but it's within a tolerance. It's a variable, but it's been pretty steady. It sits with inflation. You can project out pretty accurately. And inflation year over year for at least the last 20 years hovers around 3%. But when you're only making $31,000 and you're getting 2.5 or 3%, and you're like, well, you got cost of living, there you go. When you're not even able to live in the first place, what does that do? And here's the larger part. These people take care of this village. And Every one of our employees, the way we pay them, they can't afford to live in this village. They can't. And I am lucky, and I am blessed to be able to say this. My salary, I'm not here for the salary, I'm here to help the village. But I couldn't live here if I was dependent on this salary. And you have to be an elected, you got to live here. If it was solely the salary, if I was the sole breadwinner for my house, I could not live in this village. So it's ridiculous when we're talking about, yes, nickel and diming. I get it, stacking nickels to make dollars. I'm a business owner too. I get that. But there are not enough K-cups in the world right now to make up the massive deficit that we have. And we have to actually talk about meaningful adjustments and how we capture money and maybe how we look at utilizing some of our assets and turning them into revenue generators like they truly can be. But when we're getting mired by, okay, well, you bought a desk because they broke, and I invited you to the office to see them. And this week I told you, it is not just that building. This is not a singular incident. The entire village, we are literally back to my original report when I said we are in a moment where it is a perfect storm because our revenue's down, we need money, and everything is starting to fail, and we need to address it. And I'm sorry if I sound like I'm upset, but I'm sorry. Reducing what kind of coffee, the little bit of luxury that we are affording our people, a coffee, that is something we're going to harp on, that they got a K-cup that's $1.50 instead of 99 cents. That is ridiculous, and it is a slap in the face to our employees who, and I'm sorry, they bust their butt, I'm trying not to swear. They bust their butt to keep this place alive, and they wouldn't be here working for these god-awful wages if they didn't love this village. The same as all of you. You guys are here because you love this village. I don't believe any of you guys are here for a power grab or just to display that you're a trustee. I honestly believe that each one of you here care about this place. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Like I said about the clerk, it's certainly not the pay. You guys aren't getting rich here. Certainly not the headache you guys get being here. And you guys are on the front line, so when someone's mad, I mean, Justin, I hear you all the time, that someone call me, they're upset. You give me a call a lot of times to tell me what you're hearing, and I appreciate it. But when we're talking about meaningful reductions, if we fold that police department, we're still gonna get taxed. We're still gonna get taxed. We fold the police department, we're basically just giving a death kiss to all of our employees who aren't making much anyway, so can they really afford to lose their job? Probably not. And then we're gonna spend way too much trying to get somebody else in here, but not even that. But guess what? Our insurance rating here is gonna go through the roof. And now everybody's gonna be spending so much on home insurance or property insurance that it would have been cheaper for us just to levy a tax for them. You know, I heard when we had that special meeting, you guys had said, you know, when you said what you said, what's gonna happen with the home rates and everything else? We don't take care of the people and they leave and everything starts to collapse, it's over. Home rates bottom out, insurance goes up, and we are, thankfully Almont is on a rebound, but Almont 10 years ago was not a fun place to live. I got friends up there. Home prices were flat. The Main Street was either boarded up or taken up by insurance agents. There was no thriving downtown. You had a couple bars, like you had Chickies survived, and you had a restaurant, but like by and large, and that's happening all over the place in rural America. So, I mean, we have to take a meaningful look. We don't have a lot of money, but we need to spend a lot of money. But it's the manner in which we spend it. It's gonna determine everything. It's gonna decide what happens. And I'm sorry, Brian.
Oh, no. I don't
And
want.
they've heard it
wanna
from me. We've
interrupt.
been on the phone for months. And I'm passionate about this because I love this town. I'm sorry, I'll stop talking. I'll mute myself.
Brian, you mentioned it specifically about water and sewer, that's one of our funds that should be in the best shape, that should fund itself, pay for itself. How common is that across other municipalities?
That they do?
Yeah, that it's fully self-funded by the users?
It, almost across the board. It is and should be. Very rarely would I see a millage or transfers coming from the general fund to partially offset the cost of water and sewer. Water and sewer is meant to stand on its own.
Even taking into account, sorry, go ahead.
I think what he was saying was that the reserves are not always there, like the funding happens, but they're really
Right.
not always. So we have somewhere, there's acute problems, and those rates just have to jump. Like, they eventually get to the rate, but it's more aggressive because they aren't properly saving and creating the reserves that they need to.
I can't find it in the audit, but I know last year's audit, there was a deficit with wastewater fund.
Unassigned deposition, yes.
So the reason I got back up here, I don't have anything formal to put up on the screen or to present. This is a good conversation. It's a conversation that you need to have. But I can tell you from working with local government for the last 27 years, no financially struggling municipality has fixed itself by cutting its way to prosperity. It does not work. Are there some things around here that could be tightened up? I'm sure, because yes, everywhere. But to focus your energies on doing the things that will have the most and necessary impact, you have to think about dollars and not pennies. And this place doesn't have an expense problem, it has a revenue problem. I'm surprised you have any cops at all if you're paying that little, because almost every department in the state is hiring. And if they're paying more, you've got some very dedicated people here that are willing to make less than market. The operations are one thing. Paying out of general fund for people is one thing. The infrastructure is another. There is no amount of cutting that you can do in any department, in all departments combined, in order to pay for the things that are falling apart here. So I'm not saying let waste happen. If there's waste, fix it. But you need to generate more money to pay the big ticket cost of big ticket items. And if you don't have that conversation, and if you don't move in that direction, saying this place will fall apart in 10 or 15 years is not hyperbole.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So whether it is approved by the public in the form, I know you had one fail a few months back, or it's that this body has the ability to take a vote and say, I'm sorry, public, we're going to raise your water rates, we're going to levy a special assessment. That has to happen either here or there. And if it doesn't, you won't have police. God only knows what will happen to your water and wastewater if you don't maintain that plant. Eagle will be here in a second.
Those fines are high. Yes. Very high, and I can say they don't discriminate. I have a very small village that has no dollars, and they got hit with a $40,000 fine, even though they're in a deficit elimination plan monthly with the state. And there was no give
Well,
with anybody to remove that.
the annual budget's about 300, and they got hit with a $40,000 fine.
Paying $1,500 a month right now, trying to pay it off.
So I don't live here, it's not going to affect me, but I know from doing this in literally dozens of municipalities across the state and others across the country. The conversation you have to have is, how do we build, how do we fix, how do we raise more money? And that's the only way any of these problems go away.
I mean, one of the conversations that Danielle and I have had, and I've said this before, is we have to look at creating more efficiencies. It goes to your point too, Ms. Rosso. If we create efficiencies and we're spending less per task, there's a cost benefit to that. We're making money on the back end. It's not the front end, okay. But we also have to look at, I mean, something that the president has done, which I don't really think anybody prior to her has really done, is looking at grant funding. So I said that I've gone through all the meeting minutes from and I can report to you right now, every meeting minute from 1955 to 2009 is now digitally secured in our system. But trustees historically used to go out, so from meeting minutes in about 1958 to about 74, trustees were constantly reporting that they went out to meet with banks to see about funding, met with the state, met with the county to get grant funding in an effort to help the body here. We need to have a serious discussion about, we're probably gonna need to hire a service and get grant funding. Because there's a number of large grants that I've found that we do qualify for that would help us infrastructurally, like to the tune of 100 million, but that is a full-time job. I mean, look at what Chief has, the amount of resources and man-hours he spent just to cover an $80,000 purchase from FEMA. So extrapolate that out to 100 million, that's a full-time job, but if we hire somebody, you know, Oakland County, I just saw a report on what they spend and it's like 20-fold what they got back. Even if it was only, if it was half, it
Well,
would still be worth it.
and we are trying to get grants. We've, at this point, we're almost at $1 million of grants in the last 2 years. The issue with that, though, to your point, Shelley, is that you see this money coming in and you're like, wow, if we have all these needs, but it's like, it's Eagle, it's for the lead line verification. It's almost $400,000, but it has to be used that way, you know? The tree grant, $20,000. That could really help other things, but it has to be used there. We are trying to find them, but it's literally, it's as I manage the village and the things, if I randomly get an email, I don't have time to go search for them. If someone throws them my way, if I'm at a SEMCOG meeting and they're having something, but I don't have time to sit there and search the databases. But I can do the easy ones, the quick ones, the ones that I know, hey, I actually have that information, because a large majority of these need information like this capital improvement plan. They call them, it's like they need to be boots on the ground ready. So they want all, like what you're saying, I want the specs, the things of that. I don't even have that, so I can't even apply for the grants because we haven't paid for the thing to do.
Right.
So I get what you're saying. It would be nice. There is more out there, but the ones we're grabbing, they do fill in holes. It's just, it would be helpful if they filled in these holes.
And I'll say some things that I don't necessarily, again, they're examples, because I look at both sides of the coin. So I'm not saying I advocate one or the other, but like when we got involved with the ETIP money, or ETIV, you know, our electric vehicle money, and that was all based on surveys and what came in. But really, really, if we look at it, are we using that money the best way? Could we have done different and better to address some other things? I think probably. And maybe, maybe not. I don't know, but that's, when I sit here and listen to what we're doing, and the residents come to me and say, you know, those decorations downtown are beautiful, but were they worth the money? Well, that's the DDA. They can talk to the DDA, but people are smart. They know that we fund the DDA. So it's all of those pieces that we need to look at. Yes, we want to have a nice town. Yes, we want all this stuff. But if again, the people who are working for us are not getting what they need, how do you sleep at night with $100,000 lighting for Christmas? Like, that makes no sense to me. And I get that that's DDA, but then Should we be funding that much for the DDA? Like, I would rather take that 100,000 than say, I'm sorry, DDA, we can't give it to you, but everyone who works for us gets a raise. Maybe, maybe not. I'm being devil's advocate. I'm throwing this stuff out here because they're hard conversations. But someone's got to say it. Someone's got to say, and that's the fact, $100,000 on Christmas decor. Is it necessary? Do we really need to give them that money for that? Just things to think about.
Okay, help me understand though, because the way I understand it, the DDA pays for the DDA, we don't pay that, so explain a little more to me how you're saying that we pay give the DDA.
The tax dollars go to them, correct?
The DDA captures a TIF
Yes,
from the downtown district.
yes. So those
Not from my house, not from your
Right,
house,
not from
okay.
my
Residents and
house.
businesses that
Right,
live
Yeah.
within
in
the
that
DDA.
Yes,
district,
yeah.
right?
Residents that are paying taxes.
Right, and so we approve their budget, they put it all together how they want. But wouldn't we be farther ahead by saying, or working together to say, these are the needs of the downtown. This is what physically they might need. And maybe it would be better spent on the physical needs, whether, I don't know,
Parking lots?
trees, sidewalks, parking lots, yeah, whatever, striping, who knows? But we don't have those conversations. They create their budget, we approve it. And I think to myself, wow, we're really not operating the way we should be. We should be having those conversations about what does the downtown need? What can the DDA do for the downtown? What other businesses can they try to attract to make it flourish the way people want? What other creative things can we do? That's what I'm thinking. It's not like we don't want those, fun things. It's just, does the DDA know what we're facing? And are there things in that district that they can help with? Because they want it to be thriving for their businesses too, right? We all do. We all want a nice place to live. So those are some ideas and some thoughts, like, for what we're spending, are we really communicating with each other and doing the best?
Communication could always improve, 100%. Nathan, Nolan, Justin?
I think the sewer and water has my attention probably the most right now, and I agree with Brian. I think that as a trustee, we're gonna have to make some tough decisions, crunch some numbers and find out what we're gonna have to do as far as the rates go.
Yeah, and we are coming in, again, we all just saw on Monday, we approved the Waterworth software. Right now, as you move into budget, this is the time we do that. So all of those capital needs are going into those formulas to break out where we're gonna be in that. Just the water tower, what are we, was that 300?
322.
Okay, and that was last year's quote. And that was the one thing, there's other things. And that gets worked into those rates. So that is the nice thing, is that there's an availability to what they're saying is, sometimes there's a cap. This gives us the availability to help pay for that and get those things done. And right now is the perfect time that we're moving into looking at that. And the same for sewer. Unfortunately, I can say this, for not affecting the residents, but affecting the businesses over in the industrial district. The Village of Romeo has 2 water systems, 1 sewer system. Village of Romeo, we have our wells. Over in the industrial, over by Powell, we have Gliwa. Gliwa just had their uncapping of the 10-year promise of keeping rates and not raising them above 4% or something like that. Well, guess what they got this year? 7, almost 8. So those water rates over in the industrial district, they will have to compensate because their rates, now that we separated the way that we do our rates, they're going to have way bigger increase. It's just what the cost of water is.
I would like to just one thing, because it was mentioned, but it was moved through rather quickly. So I'd like to say on the record, and I'd like to thank our treasurer, Caroline Miller, because Without her, you guys see it every month, the funds that have grown with interest because they're being invested finally. If someone had did that years ago, we probably wouldn't have this conversation. We would have been fine. So it's much to your guys' point, yeah, we do need to think outside the box. We have to. We're not gonna, like Brian said, we're not gonna cut our way out of it. We're not gonna save our way out of it. If we save our way out of it, well then, yeah, we're 15 years away from collapse.
And with the investment, we also have to think about, we made that much money because we have that much money in there, sitting there, being able to make it. If we start spending it, that $400,000 isn't made anymore.
There are many different avenues we need to look at to solve this. It's not one.
Yes, it is a mix of fixes.
But I still don't feel like I have a great handle on what it is we need, and it sounds like that'll come. Because like some of this presented tonight was the first we have heard of it, so I'm kind of like, is there more, or what is the big picture? What else do we have to think
Yeah.
about?
I don't even know essentially that you will ever get that very clear picture. But we're definitely on our way towards it versus we're just reacting, right? We're working towards that roadmap, that game plan. We're working towards putting it in order and making a plan. I don't know how crystal clear it will ever be.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have to ask, because that statement is preposterous on its face. And I'm sorry, Shelley, all due respect, this has been said multiple times. And again, I don't believe you don't care about this village, but it can only be one of two things then. Either you don't care or you weren't listening, because it's been said multiple times. And this is a serious issue. I know President Poznanski has said it, and maybe you guys didn't hear it. I don't know. I said it. I don't know how much clearer I could have been. And President Poznanski and I go back and forth, like, how do we convey this? Because I don't think they're hearing it. That's how this meeting was born, was how they're not hearing it. We keep saying it. They don't hear it. So to sit here.
Lucero, this is the first we have been presented with this information. That's my point.
Yeah, but the information has
How
been
do I
said.
No one's ever said the shed is falling apart. Nobody.
But also.
This is the first we're hearing of this, and that's fine. But my point being, the more information we have, the better decision makers we can be. Broad strokes of the building catching on fire and falling down does not give me the information I need to make my decision.
You know what also gives you information? Coming in when I ask you to come in so I can show you.
I came in, didn't I? I did come in.
Yeah.
More
Show
than
us what,
once.
Jamie. Sorry, I'm
So-
No, the building
The issues and the
conditions,
stuff that you
yes.
still haven't addressed or you haven't identified, because you gotta have the inspectors and the chief out to identify
Mm-hmm.
when someone is offered to come fix them for free? You haven't even
We
identified
have
the issues.
we have the inspectors
You haven't
actually
identified
listen.
the issues.
Let's not talk over each other. Let's at least
Go
say
ahead.
what we
But
need to say.
You blow them up like the building's burning down. That's the issue, is you're presenting all this stuff like it's, the world's crumbling. Someone's offered to come fix them for free.
Okay, so.
And then you tell them, well, first thing we're gonna do is identify them, because we don't even know what they really are. So how long have you been here?
I
You've been
didn't-
saying, we should listen to you from the beginning, your first report. Why hasn't the inspectors been in? Why haven't we identified this stuff?
Because I don't have
Emergencies
confidence
and
that you
issues like
guys.
that, you guys can handle without board approval, but yet you just keep putting it off and you're putting it back on the board, like, we're dilly-dallying. Where's the proposals? Where's the quotes? Where's the inspections? Where's all this stuff?
And
All
I
the
ex-
stuff you just said that had been scanned, where is it? Is it back in the fire hazard that you said is a fire hazard?
No, it sits in our
'Cause that's what you
drives
said
that
on
are
Monday. You
online.
said you scanned them and
Yeah.
then put them right back in the furnace room.
Because I don't have those documents, yes, but they still live
So
on the
you're-
drive in the
you've
cloud.
addressed and identified and continued to add to these issues.
How did I
You're
add to them?
painting
Because
pictures that
until
are,
we
like,
can
all
move them.
emotional And
No.
drawing on heartstrings, but yet you're not presenting solutions.
they're sitting back
So
in a
if you wanna
spot
keep
so they
talking
can
about
be
it, we can
moved.
Keep talking about it, or
The
you can
solution.
present the solution.
We are
All right.
trying tonight, that was part of this. This is back here, this is part of the solutions, the options that we have. This is part of it. Like you're saying, mix of fixes.
That's right. There's a mix, cool. What's the cost? What's gonna cost the residents? Where are we at?
This is what we just talked about. We need, at the very least, the 1.5 million is the best projection. Does that mean that's where we have to start? Absolutely not.
Yeah,
But we
and-
see
and
the needs.
We front-loaded that 1 year, right? So, yeah, I know, it's
What do
not
you-
great to have construction over multiple years, but yeah, we might have to, all right? Do we wanna do that? What about the fund balance policy? Are we keeping too much in there? Because it looked like it was really good, we're keeping that fund balance up, but now all of a sudden we're dropping out. So what's that fund balance policy? What's that extra money? What's that been going to, right? If it's just sitting there.
That's the conversation we're having tonight, Justin.
That's what I'm
Some
trying
of
to
that
say,
fund
so-
balance went to the overage of the road project, the things that Chief has been bringing us. We are slowly eating away at it, and that is part of the reason why when you're saying, why haven't you done these things already? Because I see this and I know it, and I go, I can't spend that money. There is no money, I can't spend that money. What if something else breaks? That is,
Identifying hazards in Village Hall. We need to identify them, right? And we need to look at the long term, and if we gotta project these projects out farther, so we're not going in a deficit, that's what we have to do,
correct.
bottom line. I
Correct.
don't know why we're even discussing any other option. Push it out. I mean, the
Because
roads don't
that's
get
how,
done in the Southwest.
because
They
this
don't
is
get
how
done.
things happen, discussion in conversation. This is what we're doing. Transparency all out on the table.
Yeah.
And we all have to be in agreement. There are 7 votes here of how we move this forward. 7 votes that affect the 3,800 residents. This is what we're doing.
But I'm not sure it's all transparent, and again, it goes back to, and not purposefully, but it goes back to, if these are new information for us tonight, then what else is there?
There's more,
That we
I'm
need
telling
to
you, there's
know.
more coming. The CIP is coming. And the CIP wouldn't even happen if I went in and went and got the grant from SEMCOG, because when I went to the Planning Commission and said, hey, Planning Commission, did you know that the Planning Enabling Act says that you're actually supposed to create this document? They didn't do anything about it. So, okay, it has to happen. Went out and made it happen. We don't have it all. This is not all of it. More is coming, and I can't even tell you that will be all.
And I get that. We won't, but my point is, we're given these numbers, these projections, this 1.5 million.
There's a lot of estimates, yeah.
Yeah, estimates, because I feel like we don't know what this is gonna cost. How did we get to that?
Part of
I-
it
I'm
was
not sure
in
we're-
asking Plant Moran, I know we don't have those numbers, and the time, I could sit here and could maybe go get all of that, and I could give you that information 10 months from now, and you go, well, you could have given me a shot in the dark. We're giving you a ballpark. It's not, it could be I'm gonna err on the side and say it's all gonna be more, because we all know how much things cost right now, right? So, just like the $2 million for the parking lot, that literally was a number I pulled out going, given the road project, what I know, how things work now, that's a number I pulled out. It's an estimate, because it costs money to have HRC come actually give us a real one, right? Remember the quote? So I don't have that number, because I can't spend that $150,000 to get you the real number. I'm doing the best I can with what we have.
So these suggestions and the things that will, plan A, B, C, or D, whichever one we choose, is just, again, a shot in the dark, because we really don't
It's a-
have.
We have a
Just give some
baseline.
Perspective on the forecast where it was and what we were trying to do. So I agree with President, it's likely going to be more. Things aren't getting any less expensive. So we knew today was not going to give you details to make choices. It's more to understand the base of where the financial position is, to get on the same page that the capital outlay and costs far outweigh the revenue that exists. There has to be a significant change to get these done. Even if we took the cost and said, okay, this is our ballpark now, which is probably low, and we did it over 10 years, you're still in the same position that you have to look for a revenue solution. even your cushion or addition of net income to fund balance each year is not enough to take those costs and just do it slowly over time. The goal was just to illustrate that point. However, I moved those numbers, and that, by the way, there is a forecast behind this that is detailed and all set up with formulas. It's very movable. So as the SEMCOG forecast and things like that come in, or the board wants to play with what does it look like if I do it here, we're very ready with the help of administration to do those different scenarios, and absolutely expect that that'll happen. But really just wanted to get everybody on the same playing field of this is the reality of the finances. And as those details come forward, and really wanting to get your questions so that those financial things between administration and us, we can prepare those answers as we get those details, and then know full well there might be 5, 10 different scenarios that we have to look at to put together to say, right, where are our priorities? Where is the revenue coming from? That was really all. Like, I don't want people to walk away and say it's 1.5 million is the answer. That is not going to be the answer. It's just
And these are
an
options.
idea.
These aren't the solution. We can't show them all this and go, okay, here we are. Like, what are our options?
Yeah, I don't think it's a one fix. It's going to have to be a multifaceted approach. It's going to have to be finding revenues wherever they may lie, grants, raising taxes possibly. I hear all the time from a lot of people, taxes are high in the village. That, comparatively speaking, they're really not. But, and I don't want to diminish, because similarly, I don't know everybody's struggle. We know the struggle with PD and our employees, but we don't know the struggle with everybody else who's living in the village. So it might be a lot for someone, but there is room for capture there. So, yeah, and I just want to go back 1 second. On Monday, and I appreciate it, and you and Mr. Mitten Brian Mitten has also reached out to help with the building. And I explained on Monday that I am guilty of the same thing that the employees have been told for far too long, to just deal with it. I looked at the sheer amount of work in Village Hall, and knowing our financials, and started researching grants, because it's going to cost a lot. And I don't want it, to your point, there are much better places to put that money. So we'll deal with it. And are the books back in the fire hazard? Yeah, because we don't have a place for them. But guess what? Our history is still saved. It's still in the cloud. You can still access it. So if it does blow up, we didn't lose everything. So, and all of our inspectors have been called, and we are putting together permits for them, so everything's above board, so everything can be FOIA'd. But this is the issue with the entire village. It's not just, like I said, our building, and President Poznanski showed you the other buildings, and that's probably, and that was a snippet of one. She probably could have stayed out at each place for a week before.
Iron removal, just some of the one panel we just bought. What was the panel that went at iron removal? That was 30, 40 grand? And again, the whole plant was built at a certain point in time, 30 years ago. It's time for it to be renewed. So those panels, the next one right next to it, literally as soon as we put that one in, the next one started having a problem. Another 30 grand. You get the picture. What else do we have to do? What's some more conversation questions? What do you have?
Carrie, what falls under the guise of if we were to levy a special assessment, the Public Act 33 public safety one, is that limited to, at face value, just police and fire related things, or what else public safety could be tied into roads or our overflowing?
Police, fire, dispatch.
But what it does is, if you go back to that picturing that pie chart that Danielle had shown, where that's so much of your cost, so like 50% of your cost is public safety. So you could, when you free those dollars, it then can be used for those unrestricted things, because it's general fund money. So you're creating
And you said we could go up to like 22 or 23, there was a maximum
Yeah.
amount?
We do not need that.
No.
We
mean-
can safely make that assumption.
I don't
We
know,
don't
unless,
need
Chief, do you want a tank?
20 mils.
I mean,
No, but that could pay for fire contract, that could pay for police adjustment.
yeah.
And what is good about that and what I feel is safe to the residents is that, similar to the funds we're talking about, that public safety assessment becomes a public safety fund of which I know when I pay that tax, it can only be paid, pay for the items of public safety. Don't pay that public safty tax and then they go and snowplow the road with it. No, they don't go then to the wastewater treatment. So I like the funds. I like the safety of the boxes because it ensures and it tells the residents, you put your money in here and it paid for the things in there. You do have to have general because that helps all the things flow. But to me, it's security to the residents that they know when they give the money to the village, it's being paid for, it's paying for those things.
But we're empowered to levy that. That doesn't have to go on a ballot or anything. How do you even go about estimating a number won't cause pitchforks in the street, but that's fair and appropriate? Because there's probably a really healthy balance in between there somewhere.
At this point, if I would throw out what my general ideas are, mix of fixes. We bond for the road for that cost that actually needs to be done, so that eventually that does fall off. We don't need to put that in so if we do the public safety and you free up those general fund dollars, the general fund then those are still kind of restricted for a while because they're paying for the road. This way, you're kind of hitting all of them and filling in more holes than one. If you do your public safety, probably don't do all 6. Probably not going to happen.
No, right.
You probably work your way there. I don't know, maybe you say, so Bruce Township, they do for their fire, they have levied the option of 10, and then each year you look at your needs and go, okay, but actually this year we're only going to levy 4.5. We have the option of 10 should it ever be necessary, but we only take what we need. So you do a public safety, frees up some general fund, you bond for the roads. That it's kind of got to be, and it's gonna all.
And the hope is that unassigned some of that money that might help us do some capital improvement to wastewater.
Wastewater should come only from water.
Yeah.
Well, the buildings, the salaries.
Yeah.
We don't need $1 million in salaries, but that's where I'm saying if you only do part of the public safety, part of the mills, you free up enough of general that some of that general can now be used for those other things and it fills in the other part of that public safety that's needed.
And we would fully agree, Shelley, like, all those pieces have to come together. So at some point, and really right now, the biggest thing is getting that SEMCOG analysis, because that's gonna be like a big chunk. And then it's you as a board working to think through the salary piece, the other aspects that are other costs that we've kind of mentioned. And that's, to me, when the scenarios start to come into play. And if you're looking at this bonding, is it a 10-year bond? Is it a 20-year bond? And that's where the forecast that administration asked us to put together will help you see those details that you're looking for.
And I also think, like, when I said, looking at our marketable assets, I think it's worth considering. We're trying to go after Bruce with police. There's a lot of communities around this area that don't have a police force, so that could be a revenue source for us. There's a lot of communities that don't have wastewater treatment. At the previous administration, I do know Candace Miller had spoke to them and wanted Romeo to be kind of the northern hub for wastewater treatment. It might be worth considering looking back at that. I mean, we're landlocked, right? So like, yeah, there is room for taxes, but we're landlocked. We don't have a lot of growth. So how do we get new revenue without, like Trustee Nolan said, without the pitchforks? And there are tough decisions, really tough, and I don't want to minimize them again. I don't want to minimize anybody's personal plight or problems. We have room for taxing, We might have room to hike water rates a little bit. And every one of the options are gonna come with their own little nuances where it might not be favorable. It's almost assured that they're not gonna be favorable, but they're necessary. And that's just where we're at. It's a tough decision. It's, yeah.
I want to touch real quick on Candace's proposal, because I was in on that meeting.
But,
And that was a astronomical cost.
It's like 70
And
million.
yeah,
it was a joint between multiple communities. And to touch on kind of what we've already heard tonight, wastewater is not a revenue source for the rest of the village. Wastewater can take care of wastewater. You can't use those funds anywhere else. So
correct.
to try to capture more customers for wastewater is only at an additional cost for treatment, additional cost for wear and tear. Me and Al have had some conversations, minimal, recently about this, and it's gonna take care of itself. It's not going
But it's
to help the
not.
rest of the village.
Right? The problem is, that exists, though it's not. And that's what was brought up tonight. It's not taking care of itself. So being that hub for other communities and getting in more revenue for them to take care of themselves is what I'm talking about, because they can't. They're not. So that's kind of the tough decision part of it is, what do we grow? How do we grow it? Because if you don't have that path and you just start growing things, right? And that's what I'm hearing from you guys too. And like I said, you get very, very scary quickly, and you will just exacerbate an already bad problem. So we have to spend the money, but we also have to have a plan. I get it, but
Yeah. What would be some of your ideas?
As far as,
I don't know, given information and options, how do you feel? Where would you be at?
I'm not confident on an answer on that with what I've seen tonight.
What do you have to say, Nolan? Anything?
I don't know, the adding more users onto wastewater, for example, yeah, it's gonna be more strain, but that gives us the ability to divide the price hike on more customers too. There's only a set number of pumps, a set number of stations that have a fixed cost. With more users, those pumps are still $8,000. They might wear out a little bit faster, but that allows us to kind of divide a lot of that price hike that is gonna be focused on 3,800 people, at least on some more.
It does, but we talked with Eagle and everything, we have a max flow rate that plant can handle, right? And Eagle wants to see that at 80%, normally max, and then they start talking to you, right? You get up to 90, you're in trouble, right? So we also have to look at how much capacity do we have, how much are we using, and what do we have to develop in the village, right? We got the Ford grounds, we got what's gonna go on in Prospect, who knows? Undeveloped in the industrial, multi-district, or multi-family district. We have to make sure we're keeping enough in capacity for that. And currently, we have Bruce on. We've got newly annexed property on the other side of Powell that could come on one day.
In the process.
So
Do you know
we've got a
for-
lot of stuff that we need to keep
Yeah, we gotta look out
and we
for
gotta
our
look
own
at. And there's
first.
been other conversations, as recent as today, about finding our flows, where we're currently at, what we've got future needs for, and what we can offer.
Right.
Because that is a current, I don't know, we're talking about bringing on additional customers. We have one other user, Bruce Township, and that's current talks we've been having, and hopefully we can move forward with that, but unless we're talking about bonding and spending a lot more money to expand that plant, with the whole Candace plan, there was talks about going underneath the creek, correct me if I'm wrong, Al, and trying to get more property and building another
Yeah.
auxiliary station, or getting onto the Ford grounds.
You know what's
and
really cool right now?
Building more.
The property right next door to it might be for sale soon.
Again,
Yeah.
at what expense, at what cost?
And that might be, it might be astronomical now, but it's a future revenue source. If it can't sustain itself now, I mean,
Yeah.
at least that's an
So we have to
option.
get rates where they need to be to sustain itself, Because again, the bigger you grow, the more cost.
Yeah, absolutely. If you
Yeah.
can't even take care of what you have right now, what are you talking about growing?
Yeah,
hear
when
what-
I say that,
Exactly, so, I mean, we need to get rates reasonable.
Yeah.
Where it can manage itself. And these residents, over the course of how many years did we bond for that expansion?
think it was
Roughly, Bruce and
30.
Romeo paid for
Almost
half of
done.
the expansion.
Is that like 3 years?
it's
Right.
28, yeah.
We've paid for
3
that,
years.
right? Residents, taxpayers in this village
Yeah.
have paid for that expansion.
But you think
It's there
about-
for the future expansion of the village.
That was 30
Not for other
years.
people.
We built it, bonded 30 years. Well, guess what? It's time to do it again.
Yeah, and,
The
We've gotta
plant needs to be
improve,
rebuilt, like,
improve, not
the
expand.
plant needs to be rebuilt.
and when I say add users, that's in mind, like expansion. There are a number of clean water grants out there right now that include land acquisition and will pay for the expansion. Again, we're in a spot where the only way out of this is through it. So, and we don't have a lot of money, but we got to spend a lot of money to fix these issues and insulate ourselves. And that's kind of what we were saying is, how do we find those extra revenues? And the best I can come up with right now is grant funding. Like, there is a ton of clean water grant funding to do just that. But then, like you said, where's the land? Where would it go? And those are all discussions, but at least it's a discussion instead of not talking at all. We need to talk about this and figure it out. And if that means getting land, if it means bonding, doing another bond or grants or loans, a municipal loan, like we have to
Yeah,
explore
they
all
have
options.
low
at this
interest,
point.
no interest municipal loans, especially, again, great, if, I guess you could say great, Justice 40, our designation that we're underserved, gets us some better rates.
You both mentioned bringing someone on to look into more grant applications and grant writing. That's not really something I'm familiar with. I mean, is that a typical
There's-
position that other municipalities?
They do. It's a lot of bigger
employ?
places generally have, what I'm learning is in the smaller ones, sometimes they do it more by contract or by grant. However many you do, maybe sometimes it's a matter of a % of how much you bring back in. Or maybe we go, hey, we're just going to give you a $40,000 salary, find us all these grants, and then maybe percentages come in if, hey, if you find us 2 million,
Yeah.
you clearly paid for your 40,000, then after that, we give you a little % at the other end.
Wasn't there
There's
talks
many
with the
ways to do
DDA
it.
At some point about doing a joint?
Yeah,
grant?
we've mentioned it, but again, conversations don't, we all live in this village, conversations start, people poke holes in them, and then they drop.
I mean, that's interesting. I know it's, like you said, the answer to getting more revenue is spending more money at some point. I'd be curious to talk to or learn about other municipalities that have success with that.
I think one of the things that you guys, it would be good for you guys to look in, because I know I'm looking into it too, and President Poznanski and I both looked at similar things. So everything that I'm mentioning here is, you know, I don't claim to be the smartest guy in the room. I didn't invent it. I looked at other municipalities, what they're doing, how did they get out of it? You look at the counties. The counties have a very robust grant writing team, right? And they market all of their assets. Chief among them, police. Those are huge revenue generators for them. As Chief had pointed out, though, sometimes it's to the dismay. And I'm not looking to take advantage of anybody. And to one of his points, I just read a study today. South Lyon is insanely upset with Oakland County because their cost for police went up 9% last year, and it's projected to be another increase of 12% this year. So they're just getting nickel and dimed and death by 1,000 cuts there. So there is an answer with that, but again, how do you do it where it's sustainable? And it's the same thing with the residents, right? Where you're not having pitchforks and people really, really upset with the measures that you're doing, even though it's helping take care of an issue. You're creating another issue on the back end of it.
We also talked about a wage analysis study in the previous administration, that was before my time. Was that just focused on the office staff, or was that?
That was across the board, all employees. To be clear, we're not asking for raises.
No, yeah.
We're fighting for them.
Yeah. No, I mean, they should all get it and more. That's, I mean, it makes me want to cry. That's pathetic. It's really embarrassing, honestly.
And it makes for, at times, a very, I don't say, uncomfortable, I wouldn't say it's hostile, but, uncomfortable environment, because we're their bosses and they come to us, but we can't really help them because that's not in our purview to do.
And to Brian's point, I did have a conversation with one of the officers on Friday. And how Brian said, you must have people that love this place. And the officer told me, he's like, we're not here because of the pay. We're here, a lot of them grew up around here, and this is the place, they're here because they love it. They're taking, I've addressed a few issues with other employees and heard their grievances, and it's unanimous across the board. We wouldn't be here if we didn't love this place. That is the only reason they eat crow, but they have been asked to sacrifice for far too long, to where now we are literally in a moment of resentment. It is starting to become that burden, the financial mismanagements and asking them to carry that burden has gone on for far too long, to where we're at a moment where it's broken the backs of them. And they're literally, why is this my problem? Why should I suffer because you guys didn't do right? And to a degree, I don't blame them for feeling that way. I don't disagree. They should be taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, they're our backbone. I mean, they're as much of an asset as anything in this village. So we lose them, we crumble. Obviously, we have to look at doing it in an appropriate manner, or we're not risking financial
This is not all going to be
but-
done next year or in next 2 years. We are forecasting, we are saying, what do we need? How much can we actually do now? And we're going to plan it out.
Right.
I probably won't be here for the end of that plan, but going to get it started.
How many municipalities, you said you cover several, do you work with that are of the same size as Romeo? And how do those comparables look salary-wise? Because, I mean, it's tough, I get it, and I understand, Chief, how you said we're doing the same job, but I understand municipalities, school districts,
Yeah.
you only get so much coming in based on households and student counts, and you're limited on funds.
So every municipality is different in some way, shape, or form, and so it's really hard to say, well, you've got 10 village clients that are all, I don't know off the top of my head what your population is, but from 800 to 12, or you said 3,800 earlier, right? So
Residents.
Residents, so between, 3,000 and 4,000 people, the average police officer salary is X. I can't do that, I don't have the benchmark, although Michigan Municipal League probably does. But what was the number for the starting dispatch? 31?
Starting dispatch?
Yeah.
31.
That is shockingly low.
And it caps out at 46?
I
I think it's 43.
45, 323.
Does it?
That's the cap.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, the thing you have to keep in mind as well is it's what people get paid to do their job is not necessarily a function of how many people live in the municipality. So the next door municipality that has 10,000 people or has 2,000 people, based on their own economic abilities, they may be able to pay more than you, whether they're bigger or smaller. You have to live within your means, but if you have the ability to make your means greater, and then you can pay market, retain qualified people, attract qualified people, then you'll be in a good spot. It's wonderful to know that you have people that love being here so much that they're willing to work for what they're being paid. That I don't see in many other places.
And like Matt had said on Monday, it's just got to be competitive, and we don't need to be the max salary. We don't, you know.
And I
but
don't
we
think
gotta
they're
get-
asking that
We
either.
got to get at least competitive, because when we have vacancies, we can't fill them, or it takes us years to fill them.
Yeah. Cops shouldn't need a second job.
No.
We do have another village like that Danielle and I just happened to be working on, and in the past 6 months have had this same discussion about wages. They're surrounded by very large cities, they like can't attract anyone because of the salaries, and they just went through and did the same thing, like, you know, comparable wage study, because they're like, we can't keep people. We've got to be able to do the service.
I do know I talked to Mary Charles when I first got in here, because Justin, you and I had a discussion back in September about the benefit of moving to a different style of administration versus the other, and we were talking about similar communities and everything. And in talking to Mary Charles over at MML, there are not a lot of villages that offer everything we do. Just because the very nature of a village, they're small, right? But not a lot of villages have a full-on DPW, wastewater, police department.
Iron removal plant, water tower, wells, you know, multiple water systems, all of our roads, the infrastructure under it, trees. Do you know how much we spend on trees? And I know everybody doesn't like it and they want to put that tree right back out in that easement, but do you know how much our trees cost us? There's a lot.
Yeah, we have infrastructure that's similar to much large, when I was talking to her and going through that, like everything that we had, and she had told me, she's like, I wouldn't measure you against other villages because it's not truly apples to apples. You guys are in line with cities and townships a lot of time. Yeah, their tax base is a lot larger, but you're talking about the services.
But even our neighbor, our township to the north doesn't even offer everything we offer.
No,
We
no.
have garbage. Washington Township, they all have to have their own, that's not on theirs. They just built a wastewater. Bruce doesn't have one. Like, they don't have a DPW. There's a lot of things services that the village offers. And that is why everyone loves being here.
And for me, the issue with the wage issue, 100%, we have to be mindful of the financial hit. But when we're talking about wages, I look at it differently. It is the difference between value versus cost. And the value far outweighs the cost, in my mind. Yeah, if we address wages, we're going to have a lot of money going out, but the value of that, happy employees work harder. They're more apt to work harder. Like when you don't have to worry about your life.
Job security,
Yeah.
you're happy.
Your work-life
You're more
balance.
pleasant. This is a service industry, right? At the end of the day, we serve the residents. If I come to the counter happier as opposed to, okay, next, you know. I think we all get the conversation here. I think we all get it. Do we have any more questions, discussion?
I have a quick one for Chief. We talked about an officer being alone in a home and they're frequently on their own. Obviously, you're fighting for a lot of things for your department. You know, the equipment, wages, their computers, their cars. Not that you're insinuating, but are you hinting at maybe the need for additional officers too at any one time? Or is the backup or coverage from Macomb sufficient?
No, we sustain on the current schedule we have, the 10-hour schedule, there is some overlap. I'm just saying that there's a lot of gaps where there is only one, and that's baked into a community size. You won't find too many communities where they have this robust police department in 2.5 square miles.
Right.
I think I said it the other night that I know in my core, the foundation talking to you about, and you guys have been gracious enough to approve, those things had to happen to sustain a police department, a functional police department that isn't gonna get us sued. It was necessary to preserve their jobs as much as they're frustrated at their income, and how, it's hard for them to see sometimes. I know this, these things were necessary, but I also told you on Monday that I kind of been, in my 34 years, this has probably been my roughest week. In 34 years of doing this, because a lot of that vitriol has kind of been turned on me. Like, yes, we've got this stuff, that's cool. But at the end of the day, it's making them be able to serve the community better. It's less liability for the village council. Maybe a little bit easier for them to do the job because of the equipment. It's certainly safer with vests that aren't 2 years expired. But at the end of the day, they go, but if we had the money to do all that, what about us? How do you answer that? So that's kind of what I've been dealing with this last week, is the what about us part. If that answers your question.
Yeah, I was just curious more if you had a concern over safety, if you felt like they were understaffed or.
No, but sure, there's always a chief's concern for safety. It's not a safe business, and it's getting more dangerous.
No, right.
As time passes.
I think part of it was that we see, and in general, maybe in my home, it's safe and secure, but there's a lot that goes on in the village, unfortunately, that we don't know about, and we shouldn't know about. But all those problems that we see outside of our community, they really are here. You just don't know that they're here. And that, what does it matter if this job is the same job here as it is over here in the bigger one? It's still just actually potentially more risky. You know, it's just that it's the same job, it's the same duty.
Chief, how many officers would you need so that you always had 2 people on shift at all times?
That's not an easy question. I'd have to go back and do the calculations on the contractual 10-hour shifts that they're on. I think the only hours where there's only one officer working all the time, there is no days where there is overlap, is between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m., and that's always. But I can answer that question, but I have to go and do the formulas. Look, I'm the chief of police, and there's always risk concerns, and if you're saying, hey, we'll give you 3 more guys, I'm not saying no, but I'm saying we can serve this community well with what we have, but there's frustration. There is, and there's competition. There's when we do have openings, like the 8 that we just hired, right? It's hard to fill those openings when nobody's knocking our door down. They look at our wages and they go, what? They have no interest. As I stated, they're not looking to break the Romeo Bank. Just be competitive. They work with agencies that are competitive, Macomb County and MSP, and they make significantly less, and they do the same job. They just do. In a smaller community, but they do the same job, and they work with those people on a daily and a nightly basis.
So you're saying the consensus or the overall thought from your officers are, we would rather have better pay, but not more personnel, or would it be a combination of both? For me, if I was in your position, I wasn't in it, I was something maybe somewhat similar, but safety would have been, I want to go home at night, right? So that would have been my first thought, but I don't know.
Well, as I stated on the 10-hour shifts that they're on, there is overlap. When I gave you that example of the domestic violence incident, that was a day when all it takes is for one person to take a vacation day, or they're ill and they call in sick, and now that overlap no longer exists. It's just one. And that was a day where he was on his own, and he was on his own for a long time. And he handled it fantastically, as all these officers do.
Tilson, Peach Fest. We have a lot of things around here.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to see, like, how many officers you would need to fully staff two,
Okay.
24/7, 365, and let's look at the safety aspect, and then
Yeah.
salaries we can talk about in negotiations.
Which I
Well, but you say that, but nobody's gonna come here. You can say, give me a schedule that makes sure that there's never any less than 2 officers on. And I would say, fantastic. I can give you that all day long, sir, and nobody is coming here for what we're paying. There's just too many options.
If you can get us that, and we can talk about salaries and negotiations, you know, at least if we know that we've got the need for 3 or 4 more officers, and based on salaries, retirements, pensions, everything, we've got a formula we can use to calculate what each officer is gonna cost us yearly. I mean, we can look at that in negotiations and see what that is gonna cost us.
We
With
also have-
increases in raise, whatever needs to happen. I'm not saying no raises. I'm not saying
We
one or the
also-
other.
we also
I'm saying
have to-
let's look at the whole picture and see what we can do.
We also have to then look at our capacity to house more people.
Yeah,
Our locker
in
room is
that room.
maxed out.
which,
I had to pull a locker room out of the basement and put it in our locker room on its own so that I had a locker. We don't have any more room.
which I appreciate this conversation, but going back to something we referenced earlier, we need to be able to afford what we have first before we expand. Doesn't mean we can't get these numbers and have this conversation so that if we want to work towards that, we have an understanding and we have an expectation, but we need to first be able to take care of what we have before we continue to expand.
Understood?
President Poznanski, Mr. Clark had his hand up a minute ago, and I don't know if he's still underway in.
Yeah, I can. I don't want to step on any toes or anything, but I just have a couple of thoughts.
Oh, get on up there, come on.
I was also wondering what that pipe is sticking up out of the
I
floor.
don't know.
It's like a lawsuit waiting to happen.
It's a trip hazard. is what it is.
My name is Mark Clark. I've lived and worked in the village for 46 years. When I first came to the village, it was during the time of the great inflation. Inflation was about 8%. Interest rates were about 18%, and somehow we survived. The sky is not falling. The sky is not falling. It's not. And what you've been wrestling with is establishing priorities. Because as Mrs. Poznanski has said, that you only have so much money. Your pie is only so big. There are ways to bake a bigger pie, and recent experience tells you that's probably not going to work very well because the residents voted quite strongly in significant numbers against rolling back Headley. So I'd encourage you to think hard about some kind of public safety millage. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm not saying it couldn't be a useful assessment that would be great for the village. But what's great on paper and how the numbers pan out oftentimes doesn't match political appetites or the way people vote. One of the reasons, and I like history because if we don't pay attention to it, we're doomed to repeat it. And I try to avoid some of the mistakes. One of the reasons, and now you're playing catch up, you are being subjected to the sins and failings of prior village councils. There was a time in the 60s and 70s, and I don't know what the demographic of the village is now, but at one time the demographic was, it had an elder population. And I think that may have peaked and now we're going younger. I don't know that. I haven't looked at any of the statistics. And so one of the reasons the general fund was used to subsidize the sewer and water fund was because you could deduct your real property taxes on your income taxes. You cannot deduct your water bill. And so the fathers and mothers that ran the village then decided, and I think at the time and in that context, appropriately so, we'll keep our water rates low, our sewer rates low, because we have an elder population. Sometimes they're living paycheck to paycheck or Social Security check to Social Security check. And so let's help our elder population and our general population. Let's help them by keeping the rates artificially low and giving them a tax deduction. That probably is not a good idea anymore. These learned people can tell you that, I'm sure. But at the time, it made a lot of sense. And so when you're wrestling with these things, I encourage you to look back and see where were we and how did we get to where we are. And again, your pie is only so big. And so you can desire and want to pay people more money, which they deserve, but if you can't afford it, they're not going to get it. Or you can pay them and not pave a road. You can pay your employees and not pave your parking lots. You're going to have to make those hard decisions. I know you all know that, and I know that's with what you're wrestling. There was a senator from Illinois, a U.S. senator from Illinois in the 60s. His name is Everett Dirksen. And he was in a Senate hearing, and the Secretary of Defense was presenting his budget. And I don't know if it was in a committee or, I'm sure it was in a committee, it wasn't in the Senate as a whole. And Senator Dirksen is asking the Secretary of Defense about some of the items in the budget. And the Secretary of Defense would say things like, well, you know, it's several $1 million, or that might be $1 billion. And at some point, Dirksen paused and he said, hey, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, pretty soon it adds up to something. And you're faced with the same thing. Not billions, but it's a lot of money and it adds up to something. And so when you're, playing a budget whack-a-mole, I ask you to please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mr. Clark.
Okay, it's 9:30. You want to wrap this up? Any more pertinent discussion, questions that we might have while we have accounting here?
A lot to take in.
It is. So I guess I would propose at this point, going forward, we generally do what, maybe 3 budget meetings? My thought is we need more than that this year. I don't know how many. Let's sit on this. Let's think about it. Zach and Matt can watch the video. Everyone can get on the same page. But let's keep this in our minds as we move forward. Talk to people. What do they want? Think about it. Maybe you can find different ideas. Present some. I'd appreciate it. I mean, anything. Come up with something. I don't know.
What month are we expecting the capital improvement plan?
March, April. I can nail it down better, see where they're at, how far they've gotten, and nail that down. I feel like it was March. Either it's coming back for a presentation and more public comment. There's something.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If that is it. No motion to end the meeting.